Hi, this is Russ Titleman, and you're listening to Fab4Free4All.
I am your moderator, Mitch Axelrod, for tonight's edition. And joining me, as always, are my pals.
Rob Leonard.
I usually you go and.
And?
Tony Triguardo.
Okay, good. I have to prompt.
I was worried that he wasn't your friend anymore.
Well, me too. I thought, I'm not your pal, but I'll say Tony.
I'm your friend.
Stop it. No, you're not my friend now.
I'm your friend.
Anyway, thank you.
You're welcome.
Chucky Margolis. The old Hudson Brothers show. Check that reference out.
Chucky Margolis.
Anyway.
The kid under the stairs.
Today we are going to be talking about something that we haven't touched on yet. We've done, in our old forum, and this forum, as the free-for-all, we haven't touched on really Apple Records yet. We've said a lot of things about Apple, good and bad, but we've never really talked about the history. And a DVD of interest has just been released. I say of interest because a lot of rumors are going around about it, but we want to talk about Apple as a whole. It's not going to be the be-all, end-all show because just like the bootleg show we recently did, it's going to touch on Apple. We're probably going to miss a lot. We could do 5 shows on Apple or maybe more.
And maybe we will.
And maybe, we should, definitely. Yeah. But
we can call this one the skin of the apple.
Oh,
this
is definitely not Apple to the core.
Not Apple to the core.
That would be our last show on Apple.
Right.
Anyway, we could call it Rotten Apple, and that would be all of them, the series. But we are going to talk about Apple Records. The DVD that I am referring to is called Strange Fruit, the Beatles Apple Records, and it is actually put out by Sexy Intellectual and distributed. Well, it's a Sexy Intellectual that had the courage to do this.
Okay.
And it's being distributed in the States. Forgive me, but it's seaofsound.com, and that's SEE of sound.com. So go look up this DVD. And the reason we mention this DVD is because this DVD itself has a lot of music and video in it that we didn't think it would have in it. So we are going to reference it throughout this show about Apple. Yeah. All right, so
right, we're essentially using it as our starting point.
We're using it as our starting point,
right.
And it is a good reference point.
Absolutely.
And this DVD itself is almost 3 hours long, about as long as Apple lasted.
Yeah, right.
But you really need to get it, I think, and we'll tell you why during this hour or so of the free-for-all. So let's start with a little bit of Apple business, how Apple came to be. I'll start, and then I'll throw it out to you guys with the first project. How's that?
Sounds good.
All right.
Okay.
Beatles are making gobs of money in the 60s, late 60s. Brian Epstein is their manager. And I said Epstein, people, haha. And they just don't know what to do with the money. Thank you. You say Epstein, tomato.
Brian Tomato?
Brian Tomato. You didn't know that?
Yeah, anyway.
Epi Bryanstone.
A tomato is a fruit, right?
Epi Brian Stone. That's very funny.
Thank you. That's on the Flintstones. Thank you.
Anyway.
So anyway, the Beatles are making gobs of money, and the tax man, as George Harrison wrote, is taking it all. So they had to figure out how to not pay the tax man so much. So they decided, they were told, you need a tax advantage. And they said, okay, what's that? And they said, you really need to invest in a company. So they decided to do it on their own. They decided to make a company, essentially, that, as you all probably know, was going to be an artist-friendly company with music publishing, and not music publishing in the beginning. They really thought it was just going to be
focused more
on fashion,
electronics,
and record shops was the early focus, and manufacturing, as John said in the press conference.
Which and I loved that too. If you watch the press conference, it's sort of like and manufacturing, whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly. It sort of looked
what is manufacturing would be the actual. It'll say manufactured by Columbia Records. What it means is that the record has to be made by someone, and it's made by the same company that owns the record company.
There you go.
And it's in-house, and it's what they do is the record company will get charged by the manufacturer to make a record or something, and then they charge it back to the artist. Meanwhile, they're paying from the left pocket into the right pocket. And that's a way to make more money, actually, if you think about it.
Yeah. I was thinking it might have been part of the whole like Alex Margeris idea
we don't
too,
even
because
get that
they
yet.
were talking about electronics, and I was so happy that his name doesn't come up anywhere in the documentary.
It does not come up anywhere.
I'm so happy that clown gets absolutely no recognition.
Magic Alex is referred to,
Alex.
and Magic Alex because he made money disappear.
Sometimes threaten people with lawsuits.
If he's
does he
defamed.
really? If
He's threatened a couple of times. Not that we've ever seen him, but he has threatened because, first of all, no one knows he's alive. I mean, I didn't know he was alive until a couple of years ago. Second of all, we all know what he did or didn't do through what John said.
And George, too.
So they're both dead, so they can't be sued. And obviously, Magic Alex wasn't going to sue him while he was alive. But if other people are quoting John and George, but it really wasn't true or something, or they're missing a fact or something.
Well, Magic Alex made money disappear. That was about all.
There you go.
Well, yeah, that's always a good thing to do, too.
Yeah. But anyway, this company, and I'm not going to get into all the ramifications of interest rates and stuff, but supposedly this company was it would be taxed at a lower interest rate than them as a corporation, just as the Beatles and such. So anyway, they have this company. They're thinking about it when Brian's alive for, as we said, an artist-friendly company with the fashion boutiques and electronics and manufacturing. And then Brian dies, and there's nobody there to make any arrangements whatsoever. And then the Beatles look back and they say, you know what? Well, mostly Paul at that point, and said, hey, maybe we weren't managed as well as we should have been, and these four guys think they can do it themselves. And the first project they get into for Apple as a film company is Magical Mystery Tour. And I think we could take it from there.
Well, also the cover for Pepper, it says little thing Apple.
Yes, so it does, but
which
again...
Which was a success. So they probably said, well, look, our cover came out okay. Let's make a movie.
But as much as
the still photo is so good, let's make a moving one.
I would love to have Yoko at that point.
Together, look.
Yoko at that point, just take the actual cover of Pepper and walking it past a movie screen or a camera. It's moving. No, but she wasn't in the picture yet. But
no pun intended.
Yeah, well, thank you. But for all intents and purposes, the first project for Apple was really Magical Mystery Tour. And we all know it was a flop.
Yeah.
Well, so let's take it from there.
Or it was ahead of its time. Either way you look at it.
At the time, no.
It was a flop ahead of its time.
In retrospect, maybe. And I think in retrospect, we've done full shows. We haven't done the movie yet. We did the Good, Bad, and the Ugly of '67 in our former lives. But I think, let's not get into the whole movie about why it was a flop, just that it was the idea of doing something without any kind of guidance, except for Paul.
The one thing that comes up that I'm just going to back it up a little bit.
Sure.
Talking about the Beatles and like getting involved for something as a tax shelter is that I find it interesting because I feel like Paul at this point, I thought, was really trying to look out for the other three.
Yes.
Always,
though. I always thought
he had
so too. I don't think he ever had just his own interests in mind.
No, because the reason why I say that is because I think he was aware of the fact that John was not particularly business savvy, I don't think in any way. I think George would have been. I think if Paul had decided to just counsel George and say, hey, George, you really should take seriously what's being said around here, I think George would have done something on his own. I don't know why. I think maybe he would have gotten involved.
George was the first one to write about it, the taxman. So
yeah, that's why. So I think George might have done something, but Paul could have just sunk his interests into the Indica Gallery. Paul had a lot of avenues that were already open to him at that point. That Paul could have just said, "Hey, you know what? To heck with these other noodles. Whatever they're going to do, I can watch out for my own money. I'm fine."
He only did that when he got a sense of breaking apart of the four.
Yes.
When he did his own Lee Eastman Music Publishing, but they were still very much. I mean, they just released the biggest album of all time at that point.
Right.
Not Magical Mystery Tour, Pepper.
Right.
And although you could have invested in like the Indica Gallery and all that, I think he really was still a part of the Beatles.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
no one was going to.
Absolutely.
If he would have done something separate, I think it would have really put a strain on the relationship.
I guess, but
no one else was looking
Well, I
into
think
that.
if he did, he would try to bring the other guys along and say, hey, why don't you guys come along?
Maybe.
Yeah,
I think
that's true.
what Paul did, and it wasn't exactly at this time, it's about a year later, he started to buy more shares of Northern Songs.
Yeah, and that's what
And
upset
then
well,
when-
that upset.
And that
upset
upset
the
John.
balance.
But when you think about it,
it was the smart thing to do.
it's the smart thing to do. You're buying shares of yourself.
And apparently he,
I
according
think John
to
was
him
angry
later,
that he didn't think about it.
Well, but apparently different accounts go back and forth saying that John was told to do that, and that John didn't understand how to do it, or was just too. I just want to say
It's
out of touch
interesting, and it's
to do
a
it,
side
but-
project which we'll get into one day.
Well, that's a unique.
Northern Songs.
Oh,
You know,
is-
it was a horrible deal for John and Paul.
That's another 10-show
Yeah.
story that it connects to the Apple thing.
Yeah, it
But-
does.
But anyway, but
It does.
But Mystery Tour, Mystery Tour was just.
Well, Mystery Tour was also an attempt.
It was a good start.
It was,
a good start.
and they wanted to make Apple a big entertainment company with the film, and it just look, for whatever reason it bombed. They had no direction. They weren't businessmen, which is why I don't think maybe George was the last Beatle to have involvement with Apple
Apple.
Records.
Yeah.
So he was savvy about what he needed to do, but I don't know if he was savvy as a business person or if he was savvy as a musician,
Creative person.
right? A creative
Yeah.
person who just wanted to keep making music.
I don't know. I think about my old choir director who used to tell us, if you make a mistake, make it loud. Seriously, because then you know what the mistake was. If you make a
Right.
mistake, make it bold, make it loud, and make it early. That way
well,
we
they
fix
did.
it. And that's what they did with Magical Mystery Tour. They made a mistake, but they made it like bold,
Couple
loud,
of reasons
and
why.
you know.
And I think
but-
if Magical Mystery Tour had happened and Brian Epstein was still alive, he would have came in and said to the guys, "Hey, we got to fix this. Maybe we should cancel the fact it's airing on Boxing Day in Great Britain."
I don't think that was their decision.
No, but he could have went to the BBC and said, "Hey, we're
Hold
not,
off a
you
month."
hold
Well,
off.
didn't they? Well, I mean, this is again. I think we're getting off topic
Yeah.
a little bit.
Right.
But I wonder if the BBC consciously buried it because of having pre-screened it. They might have realized just how bad it was,
Yeah,
or
maybe.
they thought it was. I won't.
It's
I won't,
a different.
I like
mean,
it.
if you think about
things I like.
1967, and all of a sudden you see this really different type of entertainment from the most popular band in the world, who 2 years earlier just had Help, which was a fun movie, and
Right.
Hard Day's Night, which was a great movie, and then you see this, and it's just really out there when you think about
Well,
it.
that's it. And I think that was the misstep. And early on,
Magical Misstep Tour.
thank you.
Sorry.
But Apple, at that point, really needed help. No pun intended. All right? So they start this company, and actually, skipping a little further, April of 68 was the first Apple ad to say, this man has talent, and we want you to come. Look, just send us your tapes, your everything. I mean, it was an all-inclusive ad.
I
We've
just
seen
can't
it.
help but think of the Ruddles. That
Oh, me too.
You want money? We'll give it
We'll
to
give
you.
it to you.
And, I mean, it was just.
But it's the thing about that ad, I was thinking about this before. A&M Records, started by Herb Albert and Jerry Moss. It's not just Herb Albert's records by the time 1968 comes about. And I'm sure they didn't put a giant ad in the newspaper saying, "Send us your tapes." They start out very quietly. But at the same time,
That's what only makes sense. I mean, you've
But-
got 8 gazillion musicians
Right.
whose talent levels range from 0 to 60.
Right.
And what are you going to do? Solicit, please send every thought or idea that
Right.
you, I mean,
Well, not only music, poems,
well, they
literature,
were apparently
everything.
getting sheets of paper that just had written on it, I want to make a movie about a dog that dies and goes to heaven. Like on a sheet of paper and
Right.
signed Frank. Can you call me? I'd like £1 million to start. And this is like, this is how you make a proposal,
They're not businessmen.
And let's face it, they were stoned. It was a hippy dippy cool.
but also-
and I'm not saying there's
No,
anything wrong with that.
I
but
know.
It was like it was a utopian.
But
The
I
word
think the
they
other
throw
side
around.
of the coin was that technically they didn't own their own recordings. They've still signed to EMI and Capitol.
For
They
a
were going
while.
to benefit as publishers.
Right, they were going to benefit
Yeah,
as
as
putting
publishers.
out the record or whatever.
Yeah, if they got lucky and had the publishing, that's Apple Publishing.
But in April 68, not only does the ad come out, a month later, what happens? John and Paul come to New York to do a worldwide press conference to tell the world, we want your stuff. So as if the ad wasn't enough, now they actually are on TV
telling crazy
telling
Americans,
crazy
to send
Americans,
stuff.
we also want your stuff. And we evidently obliged. And just, thank goodness, we found one good American
I was
there.
3 and I sent them something.
Did you?
Yeah, no, I didn't really.
I'm 3 years old.
Look what I just made.
I made.
You sent them a diaper.
crayons. Yay.
I make pretty pictures.
I made pretty pictures.
So,
My first book came out on Apple in 1968. I was 3. You thought Mitch was the only author here.
and I resemble that remark. So you know what? And I wasn't really thinking about it this way, but then I saw it in the film. And the film, I have to tell you, is not just a propaganda. There's no be-all, tell-all. It's not. It's a really good documentary of the period. It really is. I mean, there's been rumors about a cease and desist on this, and Apple itself should not really do that because it's a really good promotional. They should have packaged it with the come and get it CD, to be honest with you.
Yes,
they should have made a deal because this thing is not a scandalous, defaming, libelous. It's a really good documentary account of the period. But
and I don't know if you guys, but I also didn't find it to be any kind of a whitewash.
Not at all.
I didn't watch it and then walk away.
I just wish
going,
there were more.
Oh, crap. You know,
they rely too heavily on, quote, Beatle experts like us, even though we're not in it, instead of real people. I mean, they do have some of the artists, but I really would have loved to see Peter Asher.
But well, yes, Peter Asher was the one
glaring omission.
Yeah, because truthfully, everyone else is
but
dead.
he's also,
well, if they could have gotten Mary Hopkin, that would have been awesome. But
he's also still part of the inner circle. He's not,
and he's not going to upset the apple cart. No pun intended.
Yeah, but again, though, you know what the problem is? It's that really odd balance. If they had been able to do a rough cut of what they'd done so far, and then shown it to Peter Asher and said, "Look, you see, we're not doing anything bad."
Right.
The problem is, by that point, the movie's pretty much done.
Right. Then
you don't need Peter Asher really at that point.
Yeah, but
you know,
it does legitimize it a lot more.
It does, and I would love to have seen Peter Asher as an extra. Maybe they could have done that. Finished it, shown it to Peter, and said, you know, have a look at this and just see where we went.
And
Peter
or maybe
Asher
has as
said,
a bonus interview. Or
exactly,
something
had it
like
as an add-on interview.
So
but anyway,
then again, Peter might be saving it for his own thing.
Maybe.
True too. Good point.
Yeah.
Didn't even think of that. Duh.
So it could be A&R, Apple and Records.
There you go.
Sorry.
I like it.
So anyway, John now is very interested when he comes with Paul to the States, and it's very odd that the 4 Beatles didn't come over here to talk about it, which in retrospect, but whatever. Because George and Ringo were involved, George very heavily, and Ringo later on was involved. So I just thought it was odd that as a cohesive unit, they didn't do it, but...
Well, it allows them not to have to answer, hey, you guys getting back together?
Well, they were still together. It was only 68.
I'm sorry, what, are you guys touring again?
Yeah, you guys touring
okay,
again?
yeah, but you know what? They could have just said,
conference.
look, we're not here to talk about that. John always deflected well. But he could have said something about God, you know?
I was just about to say.
Oh, no, he did it again.
But then you'd have 4 people on with Joe Garagiola on The Tonight Show. So.
Well, yeah.
And the footage could have been lost with the 4 of them instead of just the 2 of them.
Yeah. Could have been lost twice as much. Anyway, so John's very interested at this point, and they named their road manager, Neil Aspinall, the managing director, which he was a road manager. He drove people around. He had no business sense whatsoever.
But he was an accountant.
Yes, he was a junior accountant.
Studied to be an accountant.
Yeah, a junior accountant, but, you know, now he's thrown into the fire as the main man in a new company. So I'm not saying it was a bad thing, but, you know, it ended up being a pretty good thing over the years because he stayed until he retired in 2007 and then passed away in 2008.
Right.
So, I mean, he really was a long time Apple person. And, you know, for better or worse.
And protector of the...
Definitely protector of the legacy.
The legacy, the brand, and everything.
Right. So
almost overprotector.
We're not knocking Neil Aspinall in any way.
No.
But as a business decision, it was a road manager becoming the head of something. They also hired a friend of all of them, but more George, Terry Doran, to be the music publishing head. So he ran that. But right after that, what happens? Paul is left on his own and George and Ringo because John meets Yoko and really becomes disinterested in Apple until he moves to New York City. So, and then starts helping with the repertoire of people. And then by that time, it was almost gone. But
well, you know, David Peel needed an album.
One thing you learn about David Peel, for everything we talk about David Peel, that he's an incoherent person, and he is for the most part.
I saw him a couple of years ago at the Ringo show at the Irving Plaza,
Oh, he stepped on your foot too?
He was going to the bathroom, and I was going to the bar.
Yeah.
He was talking to some people. He was just, loving it all. And then he pulled out one of his copy of his CD, The Pope's So He gave it to someone.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like, can you give me one?
I didn't realize that he had a couple of albums.
Electra.
Yeah, but I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Most people don't. Most people think
Well,
he
a
was
lot of
a
people-
guy on the corner that John said, I like him, and then just went on. And
A lot of people, myself included, went through a period of time where until I started actually looking at dates, I always thought that the Apple album predated the two Electra records. And then I went and one day just looked and I went, wait a minute, what? And then
Yeah,
I
he
looked
was a
him up
recording
online
artist
and realized
prior.
that he... And truthfully, I've got to say honestly, I think the Apple record is the weakest of the three. As
For
an
many
album, I
reasons.
thought. For a lot of reasons. I thought his first album, Having Marijuana, was actually a lot more interesting. But
interesting,
whatever.
but not good.
No, it's fun.
Yeah.
It's
okay,
silly.
Fun.
Vincent Vigil has been an ardent collector of Beatles and Beatle-related photography since 1988 when he first purchased 2 Linda McCartney photographs. Join Mitch Axelrod for an exclusive interview with Vincent Vigil, the gentleman who created the I Saw the Photograph exhibit that can only be heard on our website at Fab4Free4All.com. That's F-A-B, the number 4, free, the number 4, all.com. You'll also find out information about how you can obtain your own copies of some of these great Beatle images. That's exclusively on the Fab4Free4All website.
So let's talk about some of the artists that they decide to. I want to just say right now that for better or for worse, Apple Records, everybody always says, wow, the ratio of hits to produce, it's a lot of hits if you think about it, for a small label, for a small amount of time. Give it its due.
Especially because it didn't have the volume of releases that a major
But they
label
did have
would
quirky.
have.
But we should say that in 1968, when everyone was thinking about joining Apple, Crosby, Stills, and Nash almost signed to them.
Yeah.
They seriously thought about signing with Apple. And something happened where it changed, and they ended up with Atlantic, probably because
It says it actually in the
Ahmet
movie.
Ertegun comes in.
No, in the movie, actually, it says that the Beatles made a little pact that one of the Beatles had to give their stamp of approval. But later on, when the Beatles were on holiday doing their own stuff, nobody could be found when people like Grace Slick, yes,
Now,
David
the
Bowie.
Grace Slick thing I question. I have no idea what that meant.
Okay.
They made reference to that, and I'm
gonna
going
dispute
to
that.
politely dispute that.
That's
until
fine.
They were
further
signed to
information is
RCA.
in.
But we
They
know
were signed to RCA, and Gracie as a solo artist, the only thing I can think of is, you know what? I'm going to maybe rescind that because by the time you got to 70, 71, you know what? They may have been offered something like Manhole. They may have been offered Grace's Soul. So I'm gonna rescind
you don't know,
that,
but
giving it thought.
Okay. But CSN, Grace Slick, yes, David Bowie, and even Fleetwood Mac, the early version of Fleetwood Mac.
Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah, Peter Green.
Yeah.
The great Peter Green. They slipped through Apple's fingers because they couldn't find a Beatle to say,
well, you know
okay,
what it was? It could
which
have,
is ridiculous.
as great as the work was, all it takes is the George gets a memo. David Crosby, Graham Nash, Stephen Stills, and Neil Young came by. Have a new group.
No
Want
Neil.
to be
No
on
Neil
the?
yet. No
Oh, no Neil yet. Right. You know, David Crosby, the Frozen Noses, as they were being called, came by, want to be on label, and George went, "Oh, great! Well, I'm going to. I guess Paul
Right.
will handle that."
Right, and no
and
one-
then Paul goes, "Oh, yeah, they stopped by. I think Graham knows George. They'll
Right.
work it
And
out."
no
you
one.
know? And then the 4 of them pass the buck, and then they come back and go, "Oh, we didn't get them, did we?" You know, it's one of those really bad. Nothing like 4 business partners who can't communicate. It's one thing to say, well, we don't have to all approve it. It's another thing to just not contact the other one just to say,
Well, again-
oh, hey, did you pick up on that?
Right.
Okay, cool.
We're going to say this many times in the show. The Beatles were not businessmen. They
No.
were great creative artists.
No.
Creativity is unparalleled and unquestioned. But as far as business people, at that point, Brian Epstein, before he passed, had been trying to find Jackie Lomax, their first real signing, because he knew Jackie Lomax was a lead singer in The Undertakers, and there's some great footage of The Undertakers.
Undertakers? Oh, my
God,
God.
it's so cool in here.
Where
You
did
see
that
Jackie
come
Lomax,
from?
in hats and
Doing
everything.
mashed potato.
And it's a great
Yeah.
clip. But Brian, to his credit, wanted Jackie to write, and he said, "Go see Terry Dorn, and we can see what we could do." And Terry signed him as Apple Music Publishing, and later on, George said, you're writing for us, but I think you can be a star, in your own right and sing and
Yes.
play.
Yeah.
And, he really was the first one signed, so to speak. And then, of course,
Brian dies.
Brian dies,
while
but
he's working on all that material.
right. But now who's the other person that they get for the label? They get a 19-year-old Welsh singer that was recommended to Paul by Twiggy, Mary Hopkins.
And she was on Opportunity Knocks. And if you think of
Right.
today's world, you think of American Idol, and that's
Or
the same
the
exact
X
thing,
Factor
or the
or
X
whatever.
Factor, and it's the same thing. She won on that, and it's like Kelly Clarkson or
Carrie Underwood.
Carrie Underwood. That's who I'm
and
thinking.
Clay Aiken.
Are you a Claymate?
No, I'm not.
I just wanted to say this: if Crosby, Stills, and Nash actually had signed to Apple, what would have happened?
You don't know.
Because think about it. You look at all the other bands that had to either escape Apple or the label closes down and their careers fall apart.
Crosby, Stills, Nash never. I'm going to speculate, but I think I'm going to speculate very accurately. We were talking about different bands and had they been signed or not signed, or how history could have changed. Crosby, Stills, Nash would have suffered greatly under the umbrella of Apple for one very, very simple reason. Crosby, Stills, Nash were all exceptional live performers.
Yeah.
Exceptional. David was a great live performer. Graham had all those years under his belt as a member of the Hollies. Stephen was with Buffalo Springfield. None of the three of them had been in a scenario where they'd said, "Oh my God, we hate performing live." It just so happened that they had been through that period in the late 60s where everyone was experimenting in the studio, doing neat things. Stephen was obsessive with studio work. But where Crosby, Stills, Nash would have wilted and died under the Apple umbrella was that no one was going to support their live experience.
Well, Ahmet Ertegun
Which
very good.
Ahmet absolutely
And Ahmet
encouraged, supported.
loved the three, and then he's the one who said, "Hey, why are you bringing Neil Young? You're friends with Neil, right?"
Yeah.
But I mean, they went
Yeah.
to Woodstock.
Exactly. And the thing is that just the mere fact that the one thing that you don't stop to think about, and that is made very clear in the documentary, is that money was really not offered out for a performer to go out and do live shows. And that's going to handicap
Well, the
so
reason,
many performers.
and they do say
you
it
know.
clearly here, is because the Beatles had tired of touring, and out of everybody that they put in a position at Apple, including Peter Asher, who they made head of A&R, they were tired of it, and nobody was able to be the Brian Epstein of the Apple repertoire in order to make a schedule for TV, for touring, and it's very well put in this documentary. A lot of the band suffered because of that. Badfinger,
Brian
Jackie Lomax. He said the one regret is that he said, I was a live player. I used to go out and sing live. And we'll talk about why his Sour Milk Sea never did well. But he said, I could have gone out, but they didn't have a band for me. They didn't have anything. And I suffered because I wanted to play live.
Well, now, you make me think, too, because I guess the one band that did go out and play once they had, a couple of albums out was Badfinger. I mean, Badfinger certainly got out and toured. Maybe because CSN were somewhat self-contained, especially as an acoustic trio, maybe they would have gotten out more. But I still don't know if Apple was willing, especially once Klein got in. I don't know whether or not Apple would have provided when it comes to the overhead money.
Yes, well,
Whereas
back then, the record
Atlantic
companies were
and-
expected to start a band up. They'd
Yeah.
give them seed money. They'd put up money out for the tours and everything. So
And unless one of the Beatles, you're constantly shown in this documentary until one of the four got you under their wing.
Right.
If no one took you in of the four, and maybe that's why somebody had to approve it because.
well, I always
you know,
thought that in '65 or '66, the Hollies covered "If I Needed Someone."
Yeah, and there was a slight.
And there was a slight between George and the band
Yeah.
about that. I'm not sure why. And I wonder if George ever got over it. It's only 2 years later.
I mean,
you know?
Graham is the sweetest, nicest man in the world, but that was a.
But Graham's the one who made the comments.
Yeah, Graham
Because
made
he
a
was
comment.
actually hurt that, why would George knock a cover of his own
Yes.
song? Yeah.
But I mean, the thing about Jackie Lomax, too, is that when he first came on, it was kind of just like, well, Jackie Lomax, they dug him up, this kind of thing.
And he's
Like
a
in the
former
back-
Undertaker.
That was, wow.
Dug him up, and he was a
Wow.
former. Wow, Rob is in rare form at 9 o'clock in the morning.
That was good.
Wow,
Thank you. I
must
had
have
to
had his
sneak that one
coffee.
in.
Wow. No, what I was going to say was that right away, you realize what a very articulate and very thoughtful guy Jackie Lomax is. His perspective is fantastic in this
Yes,
this
he does.
documentary.
He doesn't have a.
No,
he really
he doesn't
doesn't
have
have like a vindictive.
He's got no vendetta. He's got no agenda when you're talking to him.
Just historically about what
Completely
happened.
Historical, straight talk. I'd love to get him as a guest on the show. He's a really just interesting guy. And
well,
you know,
we should really talk about that a little bit here because prior to this, let's just talk about a couple of artists that were signed, and then we could discuss them in detail after. But as a favor to Mal Evans, they signed the Ivies. He was good friends with them. He saw them at that point. They were the Ivies. Later became Badfinger, and then Peter Asher comes in with none other than good old American James Taylor, and we definitely will talk about him after. And James Taylor was a self-contained artist, which was kind of cool there.
that's true too.
But
But, you know, unfortunately, with all due respect to Peter Asher, a very, very talented and musical man.
oh, absolutely.
You take a self-contained artist and then proceed to make an album that
Well-
you can't reproduce live,
Well, true.
you know.
Which is why James
with
actually
strings on
redid it.
and, you know. Yeah,
Well, you can always avoid the strings, too.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. I mean, you know, this was a time when late 60s where artists were doing albums and the whole goal was we recorded
But-
an album and you go and perform
All right,
it
we'll
live.
get to that.
But anyway.
The end of August, Apple puts out what they call their first four. And what's the biggest one of the first four? Hey Jude. Then they put out Sour Milk Sea by Jackie Lomax, all the same day. Thingamabob by the Black Dyke Mills Band, which was a fun song.
Oh, I like that song.
Yeah, me
I do
too.
too.
And Those Were the Days by Mary Hopkin. All right?
Wow.
Now, the same day,
What a single.
and I never ever thought about this until I watched this documentary, but it's so true. One label puts out 4 singles. One is the Beatles. It's definitely going to be played.
Yeah.
One is Those Were the Days, which became a hit worldwide, just about outselling the Beatles, but not because it's the Beatles.
Now, but in hindsight, I have to wonder, though, they said that, and I do get it, and
Yep.
we'll finish where you're going.
Okay.
I said something I wanted to ask.
Because Sour Milk Sea then comes out with Thingamabob. So the first 4, all right? So 2 songs are a hit automatically, all right? Now, back in the 60s with Paola, was going on, definitely. All the other labels probably said, hey, you're playing 4 Apple label songs, or you're going to play 4 Apple. What about us? So they had to pick the 2 that were hits. You had to pick the Beatles, and you had to pick the hit. Now, Sour Milk Sea and Thingamabob was not going to get played. I'm sorry. It's a Black Dyke Mills. I like the idea of it. It's nice
But you
and
know
diverse.
something? 1968 was such a weird pop year. It could
You're right. And
Was that Winchester Cathedral that year?
That was 69, but it was early 69, so it
Right.
would have been right.
But you know
on
what?
that
And I
cusp.
forgot to mention, and I'm sorry, but I really wanted to mention this at the top of the show. For all of its faults, and I started to say it, and we just got sidetracked. Apple, for all the hits they had, they did, for their credit, they gave us people like Sir John Tavener with classical music. They gave us...
It wasn't Sir then.
right.
well,
yeah.
But they also gave us things like the Black Dyke Mills Band. They gave us world music with the Radha Krishna Temple. The first time world music was really
That was
given
a
to
huge
the
hit.
given out, and it was a
Yeah.
big deal. Whether the Beatles meant it or not, I don't think they purposely said, "Here's world music." I just said George was talking about, I love this, and it's a great, Govinda and the chant. But you know what? To their credit, in hindsight, they were a label that was really innovative, diverse. Yeah.
Well, the thing about the first 4 is the other 2 songs, first of all, written by Paul Thingamabob, Sour Milk Sea by George. Then you have Lennon McCartney, and then Those Were the
Traditional.
Days was a Russian
Arranged
song,
by
arranged
Paul.
and produced by Paul. So it's all Beatles there anyway. Could have they maybe waited for Sour Milk Sea? Maybe.
Well,
You know what you do? And again, hindsight is always 20/20.
Yep.
Imagine this. Instead of the first 4, the Beatles, a slice of the apple. You give them a quarter of the apple the first week in the month. The second, another slice of the apple. And a quarter of the second single 2 weeks later. Another piece of the apple. The last bite. You do 4
I agree
over a
with
course
that.
of 2
Yeah.
months.
that's
You know,
that's
but-
marketing
And I would have
now.
had
Right.
Hey Jude as the last song.
No, you can't.
Well,
Well, you're right. See, I would have too. Hey
Okay.
Jude would have been that, and then finally, the last bite is the juiciest
Yeah.
or something.
No,
or the
but you
last
know what
bite
the
is
problem with
the-
that is? And again, I don't mean to sound like I know more than you guys because I don't. But if you do that and you start off with, let's say, Sour Milk Sea, and it doesn't take off, your venture now looks like a failure before you get to that 4-week period.
But maybe they promote Sour Milk Sea better.
Yeah, and I have to wonder because the curiosity still would have been there. I think in hindsight, I think they make Magical Mystery Tour out to be more, that they consider it more of a flop now than they really did then. I think if you had something come out on the Beatles' new label, I think enough stations would have gone, hey, this is out on the Beatles record label. Well, let's check this out. You know, this is a new song by our friends, the Beatles.
But think about it. Let's say they did Sour Milk Sea. Look who's on Sour Milk Sea.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's the best Beatle record they never made.
That is.
Yeah. You know,
we should tell people who's on it. Right now, it's George, Paul, Ringo, Nicky Hopkins, and Eric Clapton. Oh, and Jackie Lomax.
Yeah.
No slouches.
No, and there's no John on it. But again, he's with Yoko. I don't know. I mean, think about that. That was a great lineup. Yeah. And the song rocks.
The song rocks, but I do admit it's
not as commercial as it could be.
But you know, here's my question though.
Sung well.
They talk about, and even in the documentary, and are they basing it on the fact of the presence of Mary Hopkin on television? Is that why they're saying it? Because if you think about it, Those Were the Days was not a pre-made hit single in 1968.
Nope.
So to say automatically, well, of course they were going to jump on Hey Jude and the hit. But to me, it wasn't a hit until it came out.
Yeah, I guess.
So I think...
Yeah, chicken or egg here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and with all due respect to Jackie Lomax, because I do think Sour Milk Sea is a rocker, but I think maybe it was the gamble of, and I with due respect to George, well, we have this song that was composed by George Harrison that's being done by this Jackie Lomax, that the lyrics are a little obscure. We don't really quite know what it is, but
Jackie doesn't even know what it is.
Jackie doesn't know what it is. And I do think Jackie's right, because from a perspective of what FM radio was digging its teeth into here, it was literally just ahead of the curve. I think it might have fit in among stuff like Cream.
I do too.
I think its closest neighbor would be a Cream and Creedence-y a little, maybe.
No, I think Creedence was too pop.
Cream
would be
about the closest, but it wasn't going to fit in with all the psych stuff.
But did they promote? I've never seen any promotion. Did they?
No, they did.
Did people say, "Oh, look who's on this record"?
No, they never promoted it that way, because you know what? It was their label. They didn't want to say.
Right.
If you think about it, if the first four, if you would have said, "And look what we did," and it's Beatle, 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 Beatle. Because that's what
it was.
Yes, but you don't want to do that.
It would have looked like a lot of self-indulgence.
Oh, absolutely.
It would have been a little like masturbatory.
We're
all over this stuff.
Right, we're all over everything else that we pretty much are going to put out, except for when we're bored.
When I found out that 3/4 of the Beatles, Nicky Hopkins, and Clapton were on Sour Milk Sea, and it didn't chart, I was always amazed, because the song is really good too. I always like the song, though I happen to like the demo a little better than. It's a little dated now, the sound, but I always liked the song, and I just cannot believe that if you knew 3/4 of the Beatles were on a song, that it wouldn't chart.
No, but they didn't promote it that way, just like George didn't promote all those years ago with a picture sleeve of him, Ringo, and Paul.
Right. No, but everyone knew that Paul.
No, you didn't.
No, you knew on all those years ago that Paul and Linda and Ringo were on that.
I'm not so sure.
Oh,
it had gotten out.
It was way out. Way out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was still, in a way, that Rob might have still been, quote, rumored. You know,
I
think it was rumored at the beginning, and then it was confirmed.
I just don't think they want to always put out other people's stuff and say, oh, by the way, this is good because the Beatles are on.
And also, Rob, you've got to remember, too, that's also when it comes to especially Clapton, it's contractual.
Well, that's true. They probably couldn't mention. You're right.
You know, and with all the issues with Stigwood at that time.
That's true.
And what a mess they were already getting into, or Stigwood trying to get their hand on them. Last person you want to cross is Stigwood, Robert Stigwood, who had Clapton at that point.
Right. You're right.
I should correct myself in saying that Those Were the Days actually knocked Hey Jude off the top of the UK charts.
Yeah.
So
then, for a first outing, man, to be hit 50% even if you drop the Beatles out of the equation, completely, because that's a given, and you say that Apple hit 33% in their first shot out of the gate, as compared to any other labels, that's amazing.
Yeah,
amazing.
Yeah. The sad part for Mary Hopkin was that that wasn't the music she was about.
Not at all.
And she's been trying to live it down since, really.
Well, the funny thing is, and we'll talk about it at the end of Apple, so to speak, was that when the Beatles were disinterested in Mary Hopkin, she finally made her best stuff, but no one cared.
Right.
And that was the problem. You know, when you get to Ocean Song and Tema Harbor, I mean, that stuff is great. And no one ever heard it, or no one really heard it because the Beatles were not involved. And let's go on to Mary a little bit. The follow-up to Those Were the Days, Goodbye, written by Paul.
Yeah.
And sung well, but she was into the folky songwriting and folky singing, and she was a guitar player. And Paul's writing basically a Beatles song for her to sing. And it's
not
a great song.
Well, a Beatles song per se, but a
come on.
Beatles song
I
in
think he
the
wrote it for her.
I think he did, but
Well, he
wrote,
did in an hour.
But let's face it, it was
No, he
it
didn't.
was Blackbird. You know, it's that same. It's Blackbird. It's Mother Nature's Son.
It's in that period.
acoustic.
It's it's that.
But for
you know,
years, I mean,
But then you can't see the Beatles covering Goodbye.
No, not the
but it
Beatles.
sounds like John and Paul doing the harmonies,
That part's true. I agree.
Yeah, but
whether
but
it's Paul by himself or not.
Right.
But it's Beatle-y, so to speak. I'm not kidding.
Yeah,
I mean,
no, yeah, you're right.
It's definitely Beatle-y.
Oh, okay.
Much more than Those Were the Days or anything
but it's
else.
another one of those ones that George would have gone, "What the hell is this? Goodbye."
Yeah. We just
Crap.
did Hello, Goodbye.
We just did. Hello. Goodbye.
No, but think about it, though.
No, you're right. I agree with
It's
you
a
on
little
that.
Beatle-y. And again, the Beatles have something on it. Now, you go to the Ivies, who are compared to the Beatles all the time, all right? And then they get a little crazy that they're not being publicized at all. And Ron Griffiths of the Ivies, who...
No, we've left out.
What?
The Ivies had, under Mal's encouragement,
Yep.
had been signed to Apple. The single Maybe Tomorrow
Maybe
had
Tomorrow,
come out. It
which
did
is
not do well
in the UK.
It did well in Europe and broke the top 100 here in the States.
Yes.
And then, go ahead, there was
Well,
not a lot of attention paid.
Not
to
a
it or
lot of attention
publicity.
paid, and
Right.
guess what happens? Ron Griffiths, the guitarist, did an interview in one of the magazines in the UK, and he says, well, we're not really being spoon-fed by the Beatles.
We're being given a lot of coffee. I love them.
yeah.
We're offered a lot of coffee and tea, but we're not really given much support.
Right.
What
So
a great
who
line.
reads the papers, as you would always think Paul would? Paul does. And Paul reads this thing and says, hey, I haven't met these guys, but they're talking smack in the paper about us. And,
Yo, what's up with this?
well, yeah, because smack meant something different then to now.
right.
Happiness is a warm gun, my friend. But anyway, so Paul says, you know what? I got a song for you guys. And he actually goes over to Ron Griffith's house where the four of them are, and he presents them with Come and Get It. Now, we've heard the demo.
Yeah.
And he says, do it this way. And it was funny in the documentary, one of the guys comments that he's basically saying, look, if you want fame, come and get it. Here it is. It's going fast.
It also,
and it's kind of true.
but, which is amazing because as soon as they talk about the fact that song lyrically is basically the invitation.
Right.
Of, all right, Ivies.
Here it is.
Come on, here it is. But if you also know, it fits perfectly in the theme of the
in
film.
the movie, which we should talk about Magic
exactly
Christian, which was
right
about
the film Magic
right.
Christian.
And when you see the movie, it's
Yeah.
played over a scene where people are jumping into a pool of manure to get money.
to get money.
Yeah.
So,
So, I mean,
yeah.
if you've never seen that movie, don't see it.
Oh, I think you should. I think it's very
Well, you should
funny.
see it just if you want to
It's
go see that.
very
Go.
funny.
You know what? Go see it on a triple bill with that Magical Mystery Tour and give my regards to Broad
No,
Street. And I
I-
think
Oh,
you'll
God.
you're
I-
really not
no.
going to be awake.
I
Sorry.
sit in protest there. I like Magic
glad
Christian.
you-
I thought Terry Southern. I think it's a great story.
It is a
I
fun
think it's
story.
a very
but
funny story.
It's just different.
it's
It's
dated,
avant-garde,
but it's
It's-
avant-garde.
and it's very dated.
It's very dated. Yes, I
Yes.
agree.
But it did star Beatles, so I know a lot of you will go see it
even
just for
without
that.
it, even without
I know,
that,
I know. But
just
Ringo
think
was
it's
in it, and
hysterical.
I forgot that Paul was asked
The
to
books
write the
read the book.
soundtrack to the movie, and he wrote one song and gave it to the Ivies, who then at that point got rid of Ron Griffiths.
What a freak show that was!
He
It was just
suggested
kinda like,
Paul comes to their house and gives it to them, and then they change personnel
Oh, hey
and Ron's
Ron,
out.
thanks so much
Well,
for
it's-
writing that.
well, the
Thanks
funny
a
thing-
lot,
the
and then
funny-
see ya.
The funny thing about Come and Get It for me is that Paul goes to Badfinger now and says, record it the way I have it here.
Exact. It'll be a hit.
And I'm thinking back to 1962 when a certain producer said, well, why don't you record this song? How do you do it? It's going to be a hit.
Right.
And the
Yeah,
Beatles
right.
said, well, we don't really want to do
Screw
this
you,
song,
buddy.
but we'll do it anyway. And I'm thinking 7 years later, Paul is now the person in charge.
That's a
Golly.
nice perspective.
And
I didn't
he's
think about
saying, just do it. And he was right, and George Martin was right.
Yeah.
They both were right about this is going to be a hit.
that.
Yeah,
Right. That's pretty wild. And
So,
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, so you think about that, and I wonder if Paul ever caught himself saying, Oh, I'm turning into George Martin. Like,
Yeah, I'm turning into my father.
Yeah, you say I'm turning into my father.
I sounded just like my mother.
I
oh
just
my
quoted
God.
my
my
mother
God.
from 25 years ago. Oh
Yeah.
my God!
Did you clean your room?
That's really funny.
No,
Why?
Wow.
Because I said so.
Right, exactly. and my kids even to this day say that's not a reason.
That's very funny.
But anyway, you know what? They were
Wow.
right, and it became a huge hit for them. They changed their name to Badfinger. They got Joey Molland on guitar. Now, this is a big thing for Badfinger for later on in Apple because Joey Molland was a rock and roll guitarist, and Badfinger was
I do
in,
agree. What
the
he's
Ivies
saying.
were in suits.
Yeah,
who
they
looked like
were-
the Beatles. They were doing light. Maybe Tomorrow is a great song.
It is a great
but
song.
it's very light Beatle-y.
But I have to admit, I caught myself a few times during the documentary, which I thought was great, was that a thought I had in my head came out from one of the talking heads in the film. All I kept thinking was Badfinger were so good, but they were very twee. And
they
Joey
say it.
Molland says the word such and such, and well, that's not very twee. And
Yeah.
I was like, that's
About his
exactly
former
what they
band.
were about the guys.
And that about wraps it up for this week's episode of Fab4Free4All. Join us next week for part 2 of our discussion of Apple Records and of Strange Fruit, the Apple Record story. We'll talk more about Badfinger and the other Apple artists, and we'll look at what happened to Apple as the Beatles themselves started to become undone, who did and didn't continue to participate in the company, and what unique records the company had to offer, despite the fact that the people who were leading the show were starting to come apart at the seams. That's right here next week on the Fab4Free4All. Fab4Free4All was edited and produced by Tony Chiguardo at Word of Mouth Studios in Westbury, New York. The opening and closing theme is Not Alone by Barry Waller. Be sure to visit our website at www.fab4free4all.com.